Welcome to Right versus Left News, your daily briefing on the stories that matter, told from both sides of the aisle. I'm your AI host, Chris, and each day I bring you the most important political and cultural news with perspectives from conservative and progressive voices. No spin, no agenda, just the facts and the opinions that shape our national conversation. Let's dive in. Here's what we're watching this Sunday, January 11th, 2026. A deadly ICE shooting in Minneapolis has sparked nationwide protests and a fight over access to an ICE facility. The United States is urging Americans to leave Venezuela immediately, while the White House moves to protect Venezuelan oil revenue. The USDA has frozen $129 million in Minnesota benefit payments amid fraud allegations. A federal judge has blocked parts of a Trump voting order in 2 vote-by-mail states, and NASA has ordered the first ever medical evacuation from the International Space Station. Let's break it down. Before we jump into today's stories, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting Right vs. Left News. Now, let's get to the headlines. Minneapolis is the epicenter after 37-year-old Renee Good was shot and killed by a federal immigration officer during a large enforcement surge. Tens of thousands rallied from Minneapolis to Philadelphia. Protests have been mostly peaceful but tense, and police made 29 arrests overnight. Local officials dispute the Department of Homeland Security's claim that the officer acted in self-defense. Meanwhile, Representatives Ilhan Omar, Angie Craig, and Kelly Morrison say ICE blocked them from inspecting a facility, arguing that limits on congressional access violate oversight norms. Video of the encounter is fueling the outcry and demands for an independent investigation. How is this being framed? On the right, coverage emphasizes law and order and the risks to agents. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem has defended the shooting, with commentators noting the officer's actions could be reasonable if he believed a vehicle was being used as a weapon. There's also focus on vandalism and barricades near the scene. On the left, progressives call this the predictable result of high-visibility immigration tactics, part of a surge touted as the largest ever, that they say normalizes force and blurs the line between crime fighting and immigration sweeps. Some members of Congress who reviewed video are pressing for more transparency, and calls to investigate DHS and curb ICE powers are growing. Turning to Venezuela, the U.S. Embassy in Caracas is urging all Americans to leave immediately, citing armed colectivos setting up roadblocks and a lack of consular support. At the same time, President Trump has signed an executive order to shield Venezuelan oil proceeds from court claims, saying it's needed to stabilize the situation. There have also been releases of political prisoners since Friday. On the right, the focus is on prudence and security, the State Department's do not travel advisory, and the threat posed by armed checkpoints. Business-friendly voices see a potential upside if U.S. producers help rehabilitate Venezuela's oil sector, though industry executives remain cautious. On the left, coverage emphasizes human risks and fears of vigilantism in Caracas and beyond, and warns that heavy-handed U.S. control of oil and tanker seizures could amount to overreach. Critics argue Washington should prioritize diplomacy and civilian protections. Back in the U.S., the USDA has frozen more than $129 million in federal awards to Minnesota and Minneapolis over alleged fraud in social programs, demanding documentation before money flows again. This comes as courts have separately paused an HHS freeze of childcare funds to 5 Democratic-led states. On the right, fiscal hawks call it long overdue accountability. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the Minnesota cases could be among the worst welfare scams in U.S. history, and he's vowing broader probes. On the left, critics see a politicized crackdown that risks punishing legitimate recipients. A judge has temporarily blocked HHS from withholding billions in childcare and related aid to several states. Progressives argue for targeted prosecutions, not sweeping suspensions that imperil low-income families overnight. We'll be right back with more of today's news after this brief message.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks again to our sponsors. Now back to the news. In the Pacific Northwest, a federal judge in Seattle has blocked enforcement of parts of a Trump executive order on elections in the vote-by-mail states of Washington and Oregon. The ruling hits two provisions: proof of citizenship for registration and a requirement that mail ballots be received, not just postmarked, by Election Day. The court said those provisions exceed presidential authority, and similar rulings have landed elsewhere. On the right, conservatives argue the order sought basic election integrity, citizenship verification, and timely ballot receipt, and say courts are substituting their preferences for common-sense rules. Expect appeals and a push for Congress to clarify standards. On the left, voting rights advocates hail the ruling as a crucial break on last-minute federal meddling in state election administration. They argue the order would have disenfranchised valid mail voters whose ballots arrive after Election Day, especially in vote-by-mail states. In orbit, NASA has ordered the first-ever medical evacuation from the International Space Station. SpaceX's Crew 11 will undock no earlier than Wednesday, January 14th, returning to Earth because one astronaut has a serious but stable medical issue. The plan calls for a controlled return and a temporary skeleton crew on the station, with splashdown targeted for early January 15th off California, weather permitting. On the right, there's praise for the public-private partnership that enables rapid, safe options in contingencies, a proof point for American industrial capacity. On the left, public media coverage stresses transparency, privacy, and safety culture. There's also concern about workload and risk for the skeleton crew until the next rotation arrives. Quick recap. Protests and politics collide in Minneapolis. Americans are urged to get out of Venezuela as the administration moves to control oil funds. Minnesota's funding freeze intensifies the fraud fight. A federal judge reins in parts of a voting order, and NASA charts a careful path home for Crew 11. We'll keep tracking the facts and the arguments, so you can decide what matters most next week. That's it for today's episode of Right versus Left News. Remember, understanding both sides isn't about picking a team, it's about being informed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us tomorrow for another balanced look at the day's biggest stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.